Okay, hi and welcome to another installment of Math Basics with Mr. Besh. Today we are going to use our prior knowledge and skills of basic percents, decimals, and fractions to translate percent questions into math equations, and then we're going to solve them. Our first example is what is 2% of 60. Now, before we begin, there's one simple rule. We need to take any percent that is in the question and we need to make it a decimal before we proceed. Sometimes there will be one like this example, sometimes there won't, like in my next example. So this one, I need to make 2% a decimal. Remember, you take a percent divided by 100 to get my decimal value. Now we get what is 0.02 of 60. Now notice I've underlined and italicized the words what is and of. In mathematics, they all stand for and represent mathematical symbols. Our goal is to take this English question and translate it into a math equation that we're used to solving. Now, when we do this, the word what is always what you're trying to find. That's the missing variable. And remember in algebra, that is represented as x. The word is in pre-algebra represents equals. And as you can see, from left to right, I'm putting down exactly in the place where they would be, just bringing the number value straight down. And last but not least, the word of in mathematics means multiply. So now what is 0.02 of 60 translates into a math equation as x equals 0.02 times 60. And this even tells us what we need to do. It says the missing value is 0.02 times 60. And when we multiply those together, we get 1.2. Now we go back to the question, what is 2% of 60? 1.2 is 2% of 60. My second example here does not have a percent. Now I set it up the exact same way, but instead of multiplying, at the very end, you're going to find out I'm going to divide. But we've got to solve our one-step equation. Now, if you're finding one-step equations a little bit difficult and you don't remember us doing them from the beginning of the year, don't sweat it. On Blackboard, there is a nice one-step equations video that you can watch prior to this, or go back and watch it again, and then watch this video again, and hopefully things click and make sense. Now, I go through and translate this English question exactly the same way as I normally did. Bring down the 4, is becomes an equal sign, what becomes an x, of becomes multiplication, and last but not least, bringing down the 200. Now remember when I'm solving an equation, x times 200 on the right-hand side simplifies to being 200x. Remember, anytime you multiply a number times a variable, you just stick them together with a number out front. Now also, remember what I told you from class. I don't like any time my variable's on the right-hand side. So what I'm going to do is a little switcheroo. I'm going to take what's on the right side, put it on the left side of the equal sign, and what's on the left side, I'm going to put on the right side. So now, what I'm going to get as a result is this, 20x equals 4. Just flip-flop them around. Last but not least, to solve this one-step equation, all I have to do is divide both sides by 200. And when I do that, 200x divided by 200 is 1x, or just simply x. And 4 divided by 200 is 0.02. This, ladies and gentlemen, is not my answer. Read the question again. 4 is what percent of 200? We want to know the percent. And right now we have a decimal value. So then you got to go back into our basic bag of tricks and figure out how to identify and how do I make a decimal into percent. Remember, you multiply by 100. Or you can simply just move the decimal place 2 units to the right. Either way, we get 2% as our final answer. So now, 4 is 2% of 200. Remember, you always want to go back. You always want to check your work. You always want to read your question after the fact and make sure your answer makes sense. Now, last but not least, a bonus. I'm going to throw this in there because this is a dirty, tricky question. This is just like the last one, but there's a little bit of a trick involved. 35 is what percent of 7? You realize the most time I give this to students, if I never show them how to do this, 9 out of every 10 students makes this mistake. They miss it. They absolutely miss it. 35 is what percent of 7? Okay, I translate it, I break it down into my math equation, bring down the 35, bring down the equals, bring down the x, bring down the multiplication symbol, bring down the 7. But here's where it really gets interesting, okay? Because now when I multiply this out and get 35 equals 7x, and then divide both sides by 7, or flip-flop it around first and divide both sides by 7, getting ahead of myself, what I end up getting here is I get x equals 5. And a lot of students want to throw this down as an answer. because they think that's what the percent is. In reality, 5 is my decimal value, but students come back at me and say, Mr. Besh, there's no decimal involved in this value, in this number. Sure there is. It's just not labeled yet. Every single whole value that doesn't have a decimal, the decimal is at the very end. This is like saying 5.0. So now we want to know what percent. 35 is what percent of 7? And as a result, we multiply this by 10 and we get 500%. Then students scratch their head and say, how is this even remotely possible? Think about this. What percent of 7 is 7? 100%. If you got a test that was 7 questions and you got 7 right, you would have 100% on that test. Now, I want to know what 35 of 7 is going to be. 35 of 7, well, 14 of 7 is going to be 200%, 21 of 7 is 300%, 28 of 7 is 400%, 35 of 7 is 7%, or 500%. Very confusing. It hits you with it. You think about this. The first time you see it, you're like, oh, okay. The more and more you do of these, they become pretty easy and pretty basic. Okay? So I hope this helped out. I hope you found this video both informative, and I hope it helped you with your homework tonight.